You're listening to Mission Eve, a podcast that explores the stories of women who are opening the frontier of space to humanity. Your host is Megan Crawford, managing partner of Space Fund, a venture capital firm investing in the space industry. She is a mother, volunteer, founder, and true believer in humanity's future in space. Mission Eve is meant to inspire the girls of today who will be the women of tomorrow, leading our first permanent off-world settlements. Space needs women. Space needs you.
Welcome to Mission Eve. I'm Megan Crawford. I am your host, and I am thrilled today to welcome Taylor Winkleman to the show. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We're very happy to have you. Let's start at the beginning. Okay. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did that influence you about getting into space?
So I was born in Santa Cruz, California, and I grew up in the Santa Cruz Mountains above Santa Cruz. And I grew up helping my dad build our house. My dad was an architect and had his own, he was a contractor, had his own construction firm for a while. And the thing about growing up where I grew up is that we had, for the Bay Area, very little light pollution. And my dad loved the stars. We had a telescope on our front deck before we had insulation in the walls.
Priorities.
Very much. So we and my dad's got plans to build an observatory on our land someday, which is crazy. But for me, just as a kid growing up, one of the things I would do with my dad was go outside and stargaze and find the constellations, and knowing what time of year it was by what constellation was outside my window and things like that. So I didn't grow up in, a very space heavy area, but just sort of how I grew up and what I was able to see at night really influenced kind of like, you love space. It's the stars. It's all the things outside that you just love to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you think of any kind of defining moments during your childhood or any really influential people that helped get you excited about space? You talked about your dad and his influence.
My dad's a really big one. My dad loves science in general. Just science, anything is really cool. And my dad used to take me to the California Academy of Sciences. And when I was in high school, I got really into theoretical physics for no good reason. I just was like, this is cool. And when I was a kid, I think I was 15 or 16, my dad took me to San Francisco, and Michio Kaku was giving a lecture. And he was talking about the various levels of civilization. And I was sitting there like burning with this theoretical physics question. But I remember from that lecture, he was talking about levels of civilization and the things that you can control. And the highest level of civilization is controlling galaxies and the ability to manipulate them. And we're, the very, very bottom. We're doing nothing. We can't even manipulate our own genes. And so for me, that was kind of a thing where it's come back a few times in my brain, where just thinking about how can we develop this? And then, of course, CRISPR came along. And it's like, ooh, we're coming up. We're moving up a rung. We're getting there. So that was a thing that I didn't think when I was young that space was going to be a thing that was part of my career, but it was always something that I was interested in, always something that I was encouraged to just enjoy and love. And of course, Star Trek, Star Wars, growing up with a nerd as a father, like you're going to see those things and you're going to enjoy them. So definitely those things influenced me a lot as a kid.
Did you ever get a chance to like go to space camp or do anything like that when you were young?
I actually didn't. A lot of other kids I think did, and it was just not. I went to summer camp, but when I was a kid, it just wasn't a thing that we did. And I of course have looked into, could I go to space camp as an adult? It's definitely on the list of like bucket list things that I'm going to have to do at some point. But I didn't as a kid.
So, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you talked about astrophysics or physics being, were you going to be a physicist? Was that the plan?
I had no idea, to be perfectly honest. I was the kid who graduated high school having no clue what they really wanted to do. I bounced around a lot as a kid. I wanted to be, at some point, I'm pretty sure I said astronaut. It's just in the list of things that you say. At one point, I wanted to be a writer. At one point, I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to act. I wanted to dance. I'm definitely not good enough at dance. But I just kind of bounced around in my brain a lot of things, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So it was never in my brain of I should go study physics, or I should go study astrobiology, or I should go study anything. It was just, I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. So I left high school, no clue, zero idea. Which is unfortunate.
So then what'd you do? You leave high school with no idea what you want to do with your life? So what comes next?
Yeah. So I went to a public school, for high school, but it was a school that very much encouraged everybody to go to college. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And that caused sort of a great deal of anxiety for me at the time, because I felt like I was supposed to know what I felt like my life was supposed to be together already. And I felt very distressed that I didn't. So I got accepted to colleges in California, and I accepted one of them and said I would go. And I was going home one day, and I never signed up for classes. I never looked for an apartment. I never did any of those things that you're supposed to do, because I was just terrified. I applied undecided, didn't know what I was going to study, didn't know what I was going to do. And then one day my mom said, you don't have to go directly to college. You can do something else. And I kind of stared at her and thought, what am I supposed to do? And she said, you could join the military, which is 180 degrees from the area where I grew up. And I just went, okay, why not? So I joined the military, and I thought I went and joined the Army, and I thought that I would do it for 2 years. And then I went in and said, I want to stay in the Bay Area for a little while. My little brother and sister were very small, and I wanted to be near them. And my recruiter said, well, the language school is in Monterey. You could be a linguist. And I went, cool. What's a linguist do? Whatever, I'll just do it. It's fine. And they said, okay, but you have to sign up for 5 years. And I said, okay. And they said, but you get a bonus if you sign up for 6. So I signed up for 6 years for the military, completely unexpected. And that was kind of how I got my start in my first career was as a linguist. Which is a complete.
So what's a linguist?
Yeah, so a linguist. So I went to language school, and I speak Arabic.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was fun, and I did the things that I'm sure you can Google them. I have
translations and things and
things.
Yes, things. Okay, all right.
Things that you would assume a linguist would do. You could probably safely assume that I did.
Excellent.
I'm gonna try and dance around.
Totally understood. So you did that for 6 years? You
did that for 6 years.
Didn't re-sign up after that?
Did not, because I did want to go to college. And at that point, I'd had enough experiences that I decided at that point I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I went to undergrad, and I thought, I have to be really good to get into vet school. And I think this is sort of anybody who ends up going for an advanced degree gets some level of anxiety and pushes themselves unnecessarily hard to do these things. So I double majored in English and biology. I did an organic chemistry thesis, undergraduate thesis, where I just got to synthesize things and use the NMR and, big equipment, lots of fun. Hung out with the physics professors a lot and just sort of enjoyed my physics classes because they were relatively less pressure.
Right.
I'm going to be a doctor. I don't need to worry about physics, but this is fun.
Right.
And I was the giant pain in the ass student. I can remember my first physics test because there was a problem in it, and the answer key when I got it was wrong because the professor had intended to give us a problem asking about the height at the top of an arc, but he gave the wrong time. So I distinctly remember walking out and looking down going, oh no, what am I going to do? And I ran back in and pointed at it to him. And he just looks at me and goes, oh God, of course he would.
It would be you.
It would be you that would point this out. Go away. It's fine. You get full credit and I'll give you extra credit. Go away. I was that annoying kid. I was absolutely that kid. And I was in my 20s, so I can't even say I was a kid. But physics was just fun. And then I got into vet school at UGA, which was awesome. Went and did that and very quickly realized that as much as clinical medicine is an amazing thing, and everybody, public service announcement, be nice to your veterinarians. They're under a lot of stress and pressure and they love your animals and they want to help. But I realized that clinical medicine wasn't going to suit my personality. I like to solve new and different and difficult problems that nobody's ever solved before. That doesn't give me the anxiety that it gives other people. It gives me like energy and drive. And there are other, people for whom that's a terrifying prospect. I want to solve problems that I know how to solve. And that's clinical medicine. So if I sit down with students a lot and I say, if you are comfortable knowing that you're right, if that's what makes you feel good and makes you energized, do clinical medicine. If that bores you, and I don't know a nicer way of saying it, because I don't want to dump on people who do that for a living, because it's a very valid and important thing to do. But if it kind of bores you or doesn't excite you, clinical medicine is not going to be the thing for you. I like to solve new problems. I like to do things that nobody's ever done and just use the things that I learned. So one of my professors said, get a policy degree. You'll be fine. So I got a master's in policy with my DVM.
So you did these at the same time. You got your veterinary degree and a master's of policy at the same time.
I did. Well, so kind of. There's a program at UGA where you stop in the middle of your clinical rotations. You do your master's, and they make you do it in 1 year. So a little bit of pressure, but it was really fun. And then you go back and finish your clinical rotations. And so that's what I did. And it's an amazing program. And I think I'm still the only person that took the policy route for my master's. Everybody else does epidemiology because it fits veterinary medicine a little bit better. But I have to be the weird one. I'm very happy being the weird one. So that's what I did. And that's how I went to school.
So did you ever practice as a veterinarian?
Very, very briefly. It was not something that I really wanted to do. Going overseas and doing some research in cattle was really fun. And that was, technically kind of clinical. And then I was applying for the AAAS fellowship. So the American Association for the Advancement of Science every year has, it's usually about 160 total scientists and engineers who go into the three branches. And I was applying for the Congressional Branch Fellowship. And I really wanted it. And I had sort of been aiming towards it for several years. And I basically needed something to just get me through the summer after I graduated until that started. So I practiced very, very briefly. Really valuable experience, really important to do and to sort of, and it did definitely confirm love medicine, love animals, not the right path for me.
Right.
And hats off to all of my colleagues who do it. It's an incredible grind. And I have a mad amount of respect for the people who do it every day.
So what'd you end up doing with your policy degree?
Oh, dear God. So I went into the AAAS fellowship. I went into the congressional one. So what that means is, you come in and you have 2 weeks of orientation. And then they say, okay, go find an office. And there's no way to do it in advance. That's part of the deal. And so you have to go around and interview. And it's a very nerve-wracking experience. And I really wanted to work in international policy. That was where I wanted to go. I love international relations. And I had done some overseas work. And my kind of foundation in global health was global health security. So for me, that was kind of where I thought, I'm going to fit there. And that's what I'm going to do. And that's all I'm going to do. And I should have known better. I should know myself well enough at that this was 3 years ago. So I should have known myself well enough at that point to go, no, you will not just be happy doing that. But I held out because getting a foreign relations portfolio is fairly difficult as a fellow for anybody who's thinking about it. You have to hold out for it and push for it. But I ended up in Senator Ed Markey's office. And they gave me that. And then I would say, well, kind of interested in this human rights thing. This is interesting to me. And they'd say, well, work on it. And every time I said, well, I'm kind of interested in this, they would give it to me. And then they would give me things like, science. Can you talk to scientists?
Right.
Yeah, sure. And I will never forget the Fermilab guys came in and I got to sit down with them and talk to them. And I finally figured out what a neutrino was. Excellent. In that hour. And I walked out and I looked at my colleague and I was like, was that not the coolest thing? And he goes, you lost me about 2 minutes and I have no idea what just happened. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that was fun though. So I did a lot of our science portfolio. And then if you are doing the fellowship in an election year, so I started in 2016, so it was an election year. When January comes around and the new Congress starts, your boss might change some of their committee assignments.
Okay.
And my boss ended up as the ranking member of the Space and Science Subcommittee. So I had been part of our foreign relations team, and part of that was our multilateral thing. And I went, ooh, I can look into the Outer Space Treaty. I just found out that this is a thing.
Yeah. And
I want to know what this is. Like, this is wild. I didn't know we had a treaty for this. And I want to look into it. And I really wanted basically an excuse to read it and study it. And they said, sure, it's in your portfolio. Go do. And some of the other people in the office had heard that and said, oh, do you want the space portfolio? And I went, yeah. How much of my time do you want me to spend on that? And they were like, well, it's kind of a major year. It's the 50th anniversary of the space treaty, and there's going to be some legislation coming up. So it'll take up some of your time. And I went, cool. Oh God, I have to learn about space, don't I? And so I just sort of threw myself into it and learned a lot very, very quickly. The learning curve was incredibly steep. But got to meet, I think if you're not in the space industry, you have this idea that the space industry is fairly small. And I learned very quickly how wrong I was. And I learned very quickly just how many people are doing how many weird things and cool things, and started kind of getting into some of the issues surrounding commercial and national, federal space policy, and thought, oh, this is so cool. And then started thinking about, why is this so separate from everything else? Like, my space stuff is completely separate from everything else. And in my foreign relations portfolio, I could not disentangle health from human rights, from refugee, from, crisis and conflict and famine and all of these things. And I said, what? But space is kept very distant, no pun intended. And why? Because it shouldn't be, and it's not. And there's so many ways in which space really contributes to all of these other things, and vice versa. And so I started thinking, at some point I need to figure out a way to put all of this together as a career moving forward. And so that's what I've been trying to do for the last 2 years since I left the Hill.
So tell me about that. What have you been doing the last 2 years? You left the Hill.
Yeah, so I left the Hill. I started, I did the very DC thing and started consulting, right? Which is a really spiffy way of saying, you're doing gig work.
Right.
You're on the gig economy. Doing a lot of sort of really global health focused work, because that was where I was really well known. But I did some space work too. And it was just very recently. So in 2019, I ended up joining a company called LMI. They're a nonprofit and they're a government consulting firm. And they didn't have a specific thing for me to do yet. And they said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, I have an idea. And so at the moment, that's kind of what I'm working on, is how to marry these industries and these fields together and use that to kind of further goals both in space and on Earth. That's where I'm working right now. And I'm really right in the middle of standing that up. So there's not a lot to talk about yet, but that's where I'm going with my career right now.
And okay, that's very interesting. I'm gonna have to watch and see how that develops. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
So one of the things you said a minute ago is that, from outside, if you're not in the industry, you think that it's just small, it's not a big deal, it's whatever. So as you were getting into it, what was most surprising to you? Like what just blew your mind?
Space mining.
Asteroid mining.
It was the first thing I did. It was the first big meeting I had as the space policy portfolio person, and I was very nervous. And they walked in and started talking about this thing, and I just sat there and thought, didn't they do this in like The Expanse? Like, isn't this what they were doing in all these sci-fi things? Like, are you serious right now? Is this is really a thing? And everybody's sitting there going, no, yeah, this is real. Like, this is really going to happen. And that one completely blew my mind.
Those were likely my colleagues, Sagi Kafir.
Yeah. So he came in, it started, the first meeting I had was with Peter Marquez with Planetary, and then DSI came in later. But yeah,
so I was
absolutely.
working at DSI at that time. I was the COO. So
Sagi came into our office at one point with his very Bay Area kind of
with his ponytail
and like bamboo watch and the whole thing. But yeah, that was the thing that really blew my mind. I just thought, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
This isn't, no, there's a ton of investment and research and resources being put into this. This is incredible. So that one completely blew my mind. Made in Space also blew my mind. Yeah. Just the idea that they were really thinking about it and doing it. And then of course the wrench.
Right, the 3D printing
the wrench
in
heard
space.
throughout the solar system, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of blew my mind. And then the other thing that ended up really this is I will balance this, right? Give you a negative. The thing that really bothered me was there was the shuttle program ended without a plan for how to continue.
Right.
Okay. We didn't learn from that, and we had no plan for what are we going to do when the space station ages out.
Yeah.
And we no longer have a platform for a national lab in space. What are we going to do then? And as a veterinarian and somebody who knows exactly how much we rely on national labs, it really started to freak me out. And I was like, we have to have a plan.
Right.
We have no time. We have 4 years. We must have a plan.
Yeah.
And so that kind of became sort of my thing that I really cared about. The big thing at the time was, is it going to be, Department of Commerce or Department of Transportation that takes over space launch and regulation? And I was sitting there going, who cares?
What are we going to do about the station?
I was like, pick one. It doesn't matter. And everybody's sitting there going, you can't say that. But so I think for me, there were some very cool surprises, and I really enjoyed that. And I loved all the people in the industry because they're so colorful and they're so fun. They're so welcoming. And then also just the fact that we just had no plan and kind of still don't. That one was also very surprising to me. I kind of thought that we would have, there should be a plan.
Right. There should be.
There should be.
Yes, I agree.
But there was not. So that was a surprise to me for sure. Yeah.
So, what advice would you give somebody who's trying to get into the space industry or who's interested in policy and helping try and solve some of these problems? What advice would you give them on how to break in?
So I usually tell people don't follow my path because my path is it's been
a little circuitous, but most people's
unintentional. I've fallen into most of the things I've really ended up loving doing backwards, and I didn't ever consider that space was an industry that I would work in. And I don't know why, to be honest. I love it. But if I was going to give somebody advice, the things that have made me, and I hesitate to use the term successful because we never know if we are or aren't, but the things that have kept me gainfully employed, let's say, have been the facts that I'm weird. Right? Like I have a strange background. I come from a weird perspective. I come from a different place. And I also know how to sell that. I'm not going to lie. Like knowing how to spin things and knowing how to present things is really important. So if I walk in and say, I'm a veterinarian, I want to work in space, people will just say, like on lab animals, But if I walk in and I say, I am a clinically trained veterinarian and I have a clinical approach to problem solving, which means I'm very good at breaking down your problem into the constituent components and understanding symptomatic versus actual cause. And then I can figure out how to solve it while dealing with the symptoms at the same time. That sounds a lot more like I'm a really good problem solver and I can solve whatever problem you've got.
Consultant-y.
Right.
Yeah.
So it becomes, I think the advice I would give to anybody is, kind of understand what you're good at. Right? I am not an astrophysicist. I think astrophysics are cool and I love listening to my friends who are astrophysicists talk about it. And I have no idea. I have no idea how I'd approach that problem, right? That is not the problem that I am supposed to solve in space. But there are a lot of things that you can solve in space, right? And so for me, I looked at the things that really mattered. So the national lab in space, really big deal for me, really big important thing. And a thing that I could easily argue for because it fit into my background. So understanding that space isn't part of everything we do. And it honestly freaks me out because if we somehow lost our satellites tomorrow, life as we know it would completely come to a crashing halt.
Right.
Wouldn't be able to fly, wouldn't be able to navigate, no more GPS, no more TV, no more news, no more radio. What are you going to do? No more weather forecasting. So understanding there are so many problems that space is going to be a part of, and understanding that no one person can solve them all. And you're not required to, right?
Right.
What I think we are required to do is to look at the problems that we have the background to solve and understand that space can be a part of that, whether that's your main thing or whether that's the thing that you bring in as the solution or as part of the solution. And I would also say be persistent, because it definitely took me a couple of years and having to sort of leave the space field and not really leave it, but just not be able to work in it. And then come back and say, okay, now I have this idea and now I have this platform from which this company that I can work from and do things. So I think being persistent and being willing to kind of take a circuitous route, although I don't recommend a path as, one of my mentors calls it peripatetic, and I will use that word. So as peripatetic as mine, maybe not. But being willing to find that sort of backdoor in and that way to sort of stumble in backwards and be different, I think is really a useful thing to do.
Good. Yeah. I like that. So, you talked a minute ago about kind of this new position and you're just getting it stood up.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit, so what's the day to day? Like, what do you do when you get up in the morning? Like when you get to the office, like what's the day to day like?
Yeah. So I work with another veterinarian. We're on the National Security Science and Technology team. So any given day is of course different. But I work with another veterinarian and we do a lot of sort of back and forth. We have different, we're both veterinarians, but we otherwise have fairly different backgrounds. So she's working on another project that sort of dovetails into mine pretty neatly. And so we will talk about kind of what we're working on and what we're looking at and what ideas do you have, what ideas do I have, and how can we sort of marry them? And then oftentimes there are proposals coming up, need our input. I will get random vet questions from colleagues saying, oh, you do animal stuff, right? And they'll ask me something.
My cat's sick or.
Well, that too, yeah. But also just, proposal questions, how many mice fit in a cage?
Yeah.
Things like that. And it's well, okay, yes, let me look that up for you. But a lot of time right now, it's a lot of meetings and a lot of proposal development and a lot of, kind of delineating exactly how we can bring space into what we do. So that right now it's a little bit like being in grad school where you get to work on not necessarily papers, but you get to work on sort of coming up with the justification for what you want to do. And sort of selling that internally. And then eventually we will take that out and say, okay, this is what we've decided we're going to work on and develop, and let's talk to other people about it. So it's very different. It's a very different thing, but it's fun. I get to call people that I know and say, hey, do you know this? Do you know that? And it's a different day every day. And I love that. That gets me going. Knowing that I have no idea what's going to happen today is oddly very comforting
exciting.
To me.
Yeah. So you've worked in a lot of different industries, a lot of different fields, right? Before getting here. So comparing space to kind of the fields you've worked in before, is there anything about this industry that's particularly challenging or different?
Yeah. So it's funny because I come from the veterinary field, and the veterinary field is massively female skewed. Right. And the space industry is massively skewed the other way. Right. And it's something that's very noticeable, right? You go to a space launch or you kind of look at who's at the top of all of these things and who's doing all the work. And there's a lot of men in that, and that is it just makes a different environment.
Right. That
requires sort of a different approach to deal with it. I'm definitely fortunate that I have an androgynous name, and I've definitely walked into meetings and had people go, you're not a dude. And I've actually had a couple of people actually being startled enough to admit, oh, you're a woman. And then just kind of look around and go, did I just say that? Yeah, it's okay. So I've definitely noticed that I have been fortunate because we get a lot of positive feedback from emails to cold emails to people who didn't know me and who would just respond like they were talking to a human.
Right.
And that's definitely an advantage that I have to thank my parents for. But I think the thing I connect with most that's most similar to the other industries is that people in this industry really, really, really care. Really care. It matters to them a great deal. And a lot of people kind of say, we're going to be able to solve problems, right? And a lot of us were raised on these sort of idealistic, we're kind of Star Trek kids, right? We're raised in this idea that once we get there, once we get to space, it's all going to be okay. And I think there's a big sort of idealistic view of that. And a lot of us that work in global health sort of have this similar, I really care, I'm really passionate, I really want to work on this problem, and I really want to solve this problem. And I really connect to that in the space industry. It's something that I have too. I don't think you can work in either of those industries and not
without that burning passion.
Not really care because there are a lot easier ways to make a living.
Yes.
And so I think it really matters that that the space industry sort of embraces those people, because I think they're the people that are going to come up with the best solutions, to be honest. I love those people.
So where do you see yourself 10 years from now in your career, 20 years from what's the, I know you're not maybe intentionally planning your career, but
whatever do you think? I say is going to be wrong.
Right. So but give it a go. Give it a go.
God. I was just seeing a thing about like tweets that didn't age well, and people making very bad predictions. Oh, that movie's never going to make it. Well, made several $1 billion. So I'm hesitant to say I know exactly where my career is going to go, but I'm pretty settled in that I work a lot in global health and kind of the human rights and global health and immigration and conflict space and the space, right? And those are the things that I have found really matter to me and really get me going. And I think that's where the future honestly is. So I hesitate to make any prediction about where exactly I'm going to be, because God knows, but I will be working in that field for sure. It just matters too much to me for me to have given it up.
Else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and we were just talking about how passionate everybody is in this industry about what we do. And so, most of us are like true believers,
absolutely.
right? And I find that that's oftentimes, that spills over into after work, into outside of work activities, right?
Sure.
And so are there any kind of nonprofits, industry associations, anything like that you're involved with? And if so, tell us about the causes you're passionate about.
Well, so the space industry, less so, although I do I do collect a lot of the eclipse viewing ones and send them out to all the companies that will send them to kids and, kids who would otherwise not be able to get those, so that they can learn about eclipses and how to, and I always thought that was a really neat way of doing that and save waste, save the planet.
Yeah.
And the volunteer thing that I do a lot of is I work with the global health security community. I currently run the Next Generation group, which is a group of early career professionals and all of that. And I have a mentorship program within that. And last year I got to mentor one of my students, and his name is Anthony Falzerano, and I'm naming him because I think he'll get a kick out of this. And he's a really, really brilliant guy, and he really cared about weather and climate. And so we were sitting down and talking about, what are you going to do for your project? Because in the mentorship program, we just sort of make them do something, figure out what you want to do and do it. And he said, well, I'm interested in kind of that. And I said, oh, okay. And I started kind of pushing him towards an idea. And we ended up doing a project looking at remote sensing applications to global health. And so how does space really inform this industry? And he's currently, he finished grad school. He did a internship at the Wilson Center and then went to Lawrence Livermore. And by the time this airs, God knows where he'll be. He'll be somewhere amazing doing something. But he's been involved with me around space. Did a conference back in July, and he helped me do background research for it because he has all of it. And so that's something that has been incredibly rewarding. And then I'm actually coming up on starting adjuncting at Georgetown.
Oh, fun.
Which isn't volunteer, but is definitely...
But adjunct is, you get paid so little, it might as well be volunteer.
I don't actually know how much I'm getting paid. I signed up for it without knowing.
Yeah, but it won't, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because it won't be significant.
Right.
I've been there, done that.
And that, so I'm doing a survey for the school of microbiology, I think it is. I should double check that. But doing a survey on international policy, and the Outer Space Treaty is definitely going to be a big part of it. I think it's a really important, first of all, it's one of my favorite documents just because it's the story of how it comes about and who's sitting at the table, right? The Soviets and the Americans sitting across the table in 1966, hammering out a treaty
about space.
Yeah. And just the idea of trying to understand how that even came about and the tension that must have been in the room, and then studying how permissive that treaty is, but yet how restrictive is, I think, so fundamentally important to understanding how international relations really work. And it's sort of a two-party thing, right? And very few things in international relations are just really two parties. Right. So it's one of those things that's definitely going to come up for my students, and they're going to have to learn about it, and they're going to have to understand it. So yeah, those are kinds of the things I do. Volunteer, semi-volunteering outside of work. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I think very few people understand how important space has been in the American-Russian relationship. Oh my God. Right? Not just the race to the moon and all of that, all of that stuff, but even through the International Space Station and going from Soviet to Russian, and how, the cooperation on the space station, all those things, it's been such a huge part of the relationship between the two countries, like it's really been a driving factor.
I think it's been the best part of our relationship.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, so important. And one of the other reasons why I sat there and said, you mean you don't want to have a space station anymore?
Right?
How are we going to be friends with Russia? How are we going to even maintain what little we do have? Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So changing gears here a little. What's your vision for humanity's future in space? That's, for me, that's my passion is getting as many humans up there as possible. So what are your thoughts?
God, yeah. I again, Star Trek kid and Star Wars kid, and very much kind of love that and it's unrealistically idealistic, I'm sure. But I very much love that idea of, a truly global federation, a truly, recognizing that, yes, we all come from sovereign nations, and there's a lot of that going on down here. But once you get up there, you're from Earth. Right? You're from Earth, and that needs to unite us far more than anything else on Earth divides us. And so for me, it's twofold. It's, having that sort of vision of understanding that we need to work together, and we need to genuinely recognize that we're all Earthlings. And when you go out into space and all of that, I think it's kind of like when you join the military, right? When you join the military, you're American, and then you're from the state that you're from, and it kind of goes. And I think when you go to space, it needs to be the same hierarchy. You're Earth, you're Earthling.
Right.
And then you're from whatever country you're from, and go in that order, because it's a dangerous place, and we're going to need to work together at that level to make it work. That being said, I absolutely love the idea of settling Mars and settling the moon and exploring beyond that and looking for other planets. But at the moment, and I'm gonna quote the former UN Secretary General, there is no planet B.
Right.
There is no planet B. And so I think for me, my vision of humanity in space involves making sure that we have a place to come home to. And it's not some idealistic, all just nothing but trees. But at the same time, we really need to make sure that wherever we're leaving from, we can come back to, because this is always going to be our home.
Right.
Wherever we go. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're taking care of the planet that gets us there, and that we come back to.
So when it's time, are you going to go? Will you permanently move off world?
There are so many factors that would, I mean, my father has already said he would go. My father has definitely volunteered to go and said, when you meet Elon Musk, tell him I want to go and I volunteer as tribute and all of that. So my dad's very gung-ho, and I think I would go depending, right? Because the things that matter in life are, I think, the people that you're with and the people that you're doing things with. So,
you could come back and visit anytime you want.
If I could come back and visit anytime, I think I would. I think it'd be a really cool thing. And I think that's a very American answer, right? We have sort of a history in this country of kind of blindly going places and not really considering the consequences and figuring it out later, which is maybe not the best approach. But I would say that, I think I would go. I don't know if I'd be in the first wave.
That's a good caveat, right?
We'll
wait and see how it goes for a minute.
Yeah.
And You
know, the earliest explorers tend to not do the best. I think it's, like a Roanoke kind of a thing. But I think, the second and third wave tend to do better. And I think it also depends on what the plan is.
Right. Well, you have to have confidence in it.
You have to have confidence in it. And I think, and I'm going to go like slightly social justice for a second, but I think it's important that if we're going to go somewhere, we at least recognize that we need to check and make sure that it doesn't belong to someone else first. Right.
Make sure that we're not killing any ecosystems that are,
like let's learn our lesson from what we've done to our own home and not do it again. But I think I would go. I'm crazy enough to go. Sure.
Good. Me too. We'll go together.
All right.
We'll go together.
That works.
All right. Thank you so much, Taylor. It's been an absolute pleasure learning about you and your exciting and interesting journey and how you got here. And we're happy to have you in the space industry.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Mission Eve is a production of the Center for Space, Commerce, and Finance, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to educating entrepreneurs and investors about their respective challenges and opportunities as it relates to space. Megan Crawford has been your host and executive producer. Aaron Pagel is the executive director for the center and producer and editor for this episode. Marketing and communications for Mission Eve is managed by Nikki Martinez. Theme music has been composed by Liz Fole. If you'd like to support this podcast, please visit patreon.com/missioneve to become a monthly subscriber. We have multiple tiers available with benefits like personalized thank yous, access to limited edition t-shirts, opportunities to engage with our interviewees via online Ask Me Anything sessions, and small group gatherings with Megan Crawford when available. Any support you can offer will go a long way to helping us continue to tell the stories of the women who are making life in space a reality. Please follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Center for Space Commerce and Finance, Twitter at CSCF_nonprofit, and LinkedIn at linkedin.com/company/CSCF. Thank you very much for listening.